You're listening to Beyond Wellness Radio, bringing you the cutting edge in health, nutrition, and sports performance. Stay up to date and listen anywhere, anytime on your computer, tablet, or smartphone by subscribing on iTunes. Catch your hosts, Dr. Justin Marchegiani and Barris Harvey, as they answer your burning health questions as well as interviews from world-renowned guest experts. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.
Hey there, this is Dr. Justin Marchegiani, and welcome to another awesome episode of Beyond Wellness Radio. Again, we have a great show in store for you. Before, go to beyondwellnessradio.com. Click on the newsletter sign-up button. You can sign up for our newsletter and get show updates right in your inbox before anyone else. You can also click on the questions button and even speak questions live, and we'll be able to answer it on the air for you. You can also click on the write a review button. If you really enjoy the show, write us a review. Let us know on iTunes. Let the world know. Think of one person that would benefit from listening to this show and share it with them. Sharing is caring. Also, check out justinhealth.com, which is my personal site. Again, I have some complimentary functional medicine consults available. You can also sign up for the free thyroid series and female hormone series as well. You can also go to reallyhealthynow.com. That's Barris Harvey's website, where he has some great articles and blogs and videos for you there as well, and even some consultations. Again, we have an awesome show in store. Stay tuned. Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani at Beyond Wellness Radio, and I have Mike Mutzel here. Is that pronounced right, Mike?
That's right.
All right, awesome. And Mike, again, Mike and I just met last month in Houston at a functional medicine conference. And Mike has a book out called The Belly Fat Effect, and he's got a lot of awesome videos on YouTube and Facebook. And a lot of the things that Mike has talked about with fat burning and a lot of the things about methylation really resonated with me, and I thought it would resonate with the listener. So we got him on the show, and I'm hoping he's going to drop some serious brain candy here today.
That's a plan. Thanks so much for having me on, Dr. Justin. It's great to be here.
Awesome, Mike. Well, what's going on in your sphere right now? Is there anything you're working on that's fresh or new that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, a bunch of different things. I mean, it's spring for us here in the U.S. and so forth. And so I think a lot of people are kind of, wanting to get in shape for summer and so forth. So I've been doing some webinars on fat loss and trying to kind of reposition our mindset on how we burn fat. So trying to teach people about that. And just in brief, we're so focused on fat burning and kind of not so much on kind of where fat is burned. It's burned inside our muscle tissue. So kind of what I've been trying to focus kind of reframe the thought process is let's focus on musculoskeletal health, like the health of our muscle, because that's the site of fat burning, instead of just focusing on burning fat. And so, things like adequate protein, resistance training, not just burning calories and, knocking it out on the treadmill and the elliptical, like really getting into the gym and causing your muscles to be fatigued with weights. And that's really kind of what I've been focusing on and trying to, kind of emphasize, just kind of getting back to the basics and, just strength training and getting in there and, working out to failure. And that's, by far the best quote unquote fat loss strategy. A lot of people, we can talk about kind of my backstory of competitive bike racing, but I was like a skinny fat guy for a little bit and had just trashed testosterone and, my thyroid was off and cortisol was through the roof and I wasn't sleeping and all that. And I thought I was being healthy, bike racing and training 20 hours a week. And I was very aerobically fit, but metabolically a mess. So I'm trying to prevent people from going down that path.
Very cool. And Mike, do you have a background in chemistry or biochem at all?
Yeah, so I did the pre-med undergrad at Western Washington University. So did a lot of, biochemistry and cellular molecular biology and so forth. I took the MCAT, back in, this was 2007, and, was super excited, wanted to go to medical school, and decided that wasn't the best approach for me. It was kind of a serendipitous conversation when I was in Boston at a bar waiting for my family to come for Thanksgiving because my brother was going to school there at the time. And I was sitting next to this gentleman by himself, and he was the chief medical officer of Merck Pharmaceuticals, and we started talking, and I was just so jazzed. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just took the MCAT, I'm so jazzed. And he's like, you know what? Medicine is changing big time. So, if you are into the biochemistry, you're into the biology, you can do a lot of things medically related. But if I were to go back through, I wouldn't go to medical school anymore. And it just kind of Like, what? This is a CMO of Merck, chief medical officer, and, he's an MD from Harvard and all this sort of stuff. And so I just kind of thought, so I started asking some of my MD friends, and they said, you know what, if I was you, I wouldn't go back. Things are changing. So I'm finishing up my master's degree in nutrition actually next month in April, fly out to University of Bridgeport to take the exam. So really just decided, you know what, I'm going to work in the nutrition industry and get a master's degree. And I ended up not doing the medical school route, but yeah, so that's kind of my backstory.
Got it. Very cool. So you were this skinny fat cycler a while back, and you wrote this book, Belly Fat Effect. So you obviously, learned about leptin and all of the hormones and how you can use exercise and all these different tools to basically shunt more of your energy to the mitochondria, or more of your storage calories to the mitochondria to burn, and also put on more muscle. And there's a lot of, technicality of how this works, but can you just talk about like the 20%, the 80% of, what you can do, or how should I say it, the 20% that will get the 80% of the results? So
yeah, definitely.
Can you touch upon that?
Great. Yeah, great point. So the book Belly Fat Effect is actually a lot of information about gut bacteria. And so I was, kind of going back just to give folks kind of the backstory. I was working in a medical office with this MD doing nutrition work and personal training and so forth. And, just getting people on real food, turning off the lights at night, just kind of the simple lifestyle stuff that all your listeners probably know, getting off gluten and allergens and eating paleo and so forth, and was getting good results. And then one of the medical assistants who actually never met with me, we would have like, conversations in the hallway and so forth about tips to help her lose weight. She was morbidly obese, like 350 plus pounds. So she got bariatric surgery, and within weeks she was like half the size, and then became super skinny, like literally went from 350 to like 115 pounds in a very short period of time. I'm like, wow. Oh my, what is up with this bariatric surgery? This is incredible. So I started doing research on that, and it turns out that it's not just, the way that bariatric surgery causes weight loss is not by restricting how much food people eat. It's by changing the gut microbiome, and it changes these things called gut hormones, these incretin hormones. So that to me was just so fascinating, and I started to look into the research, and it turns out there's many ways that we can turn on these gut hormones without having to undergo bariatric surgery. Things like whey protein, pea protein, eating fiber, eating blueberries and raspberries and color-rich fruits and vegetables and so forth. So that's kind of the premise of the book Belly Fat Effect, is just really focusing on gut health, and again, kind of the science is there, the most effective medical weight loss procedure is bariatric surgery. And I'm not, a fan of it. I'm not saying anyone should go out there and get the surgery, get the procedure. But if we look at the mechanism of action, we can mimic the hormonal effect naturally. So pea protein, whey protein, fiber, just eating mindfully, chewing your food, very easy way to activate these gut hormones. Eating breakfast, believe it or not, breakfast eaters have suppressions of these gut hormones, have alterations in leptin. So that's kind of the backstory in the book is really focusing on gut health, and that will enable us to become more efficient, better fat burners.
Very cool. And again, your book can be purchased on Amazon, and also can it be purchased at bellyfateffect.com too?
Good point. I don't sell it directly there, but what I do have on that site, bellyfateffect.com, is videos. So if people are, if they're like, what is he talking about? Gut hormones? What are gut hormones? We did, there's like 3 or 4 videos on that. And then also kind of a key theme in the book is the circadian clock system. So basically, we have little molecular clocks inside our cells, and it kind of sounds science fiction, but it's really true. And so we talk about meal timing and why it's really important to eat a lot of your calories in the morning, eat a lot of calories at night. At lunch, and tone down at night, because from a biological rhythm standpoint, our gut is really active first thing in the morning and during lunchtime. So it's important that, we kind of, fuel our GI tract in our body with food when the digestive secretions and motility and so forth are at their highest.
I think it's a really good point. I think a lot of people, especially eating the standard American diet, aren't eating foods that are fueling appetite suppression, right? They're eating all the carbohydrate, glutinous rich foods that aren't stimulating the adiponectin, peptide YY, cholecystokinin, all of those neurochemical feedbacks that tell the brain, hey, we're full now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, not only that, Dr. Justin, but folks are not eating mindfully, so that's the big thing. literally research has shown that if you don't chew your food, you don't activate these gut hormones. And so just to kind of provide some context of what these gut hormones do is they instruct insulin to be released from the pancreas. And so everyone knows about insulin resistance and they hear about like the postprandial or the post-meal rise in insulin, but we don't really think like, well, wait, how does insulin rise? Well, it's not just because the blood glucose is going up. It's also from the release of these hormones. They're called incretins because they help insulin be released. And when you don't tell your brain and your gut that food's coming in, meaning you're not masticating, you're not chewing, you're not activating that vagal nerve, then that affects the release of insulin. Then blood sugar goes super high and so forth. And so it's really important just obviously we eat real food, and gluten-free and healthy fats and, wild caught and so forth. That's all really important. But you also have to chew your food and be in a mindful state. So many people are just, it's like they're getting gas at the gas station. They just want to refuel in 2 minutes and then be done with it.
Go into the motions.
Exactly. Right. So just take time for your food. And this is a lifelong lesson I think we all need to work on, because we're all busy. We have deadlines and obligations and so forth. But if we just sit down and the science clearly shows 42 bites per swallow is where you want to be.
All right, you just seriously dropped a major knowledge bomb. I just got to take a second to back up here and take a breath. All right, so we're eating, right? We're chewing more food, right? We're activating that vagal nerve, right? That's activating our parasympathetic nervous system, getting the enzymes, getting our HCl going. And you mentioned something about incretins. Can you touch more upon that? I didn't quite make the connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's the name of these gut hormones. Okay. So if you just Google incretin, which is INCRETIN, that's kind of like when we think of sex hormones, we have estrogen, testosterone, DHEA, and so forth. When we think of the incretins, we have these gut hormones. They're called GLP-1. You mentioned one earlier, PYY. Yeah. We have secretin. We have cholecystokinin or CCK. We have a bunch of these hormones, and they're called incretins. And kind of the derivative of the word derives from how they affect or augment or assist insulin in its signaling. That's kind of where it's derived from.
Okay, so if we don't chew our food well, what happens to incretin now?
They're not released properly.
Not released. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the bottom line. So these so if you chew your food quickly, or if you're under stress, or if you skip breakfast, or if you just have long-lasting metabolic issues, then these gut hormones are not released properly. And then so let me just back up. More than 50% of insulin's release is contingent upon the activity of these gut hormones. 50%, that's a really big deal. So if, say you're pre-diabetic, you have elevated fasting glucose, you have a hemoglobin A1C, or your red blood cells are being glycated from excess sugar in your bloodstream. Okay, you're trying to improve your metabolic profile. You want to address the gut first. Vanadium and zinc and, berberine, all these things are really good. All that,
right.
It's all good. It's great. It's awesome. But you want to look at the gut first because more than 50% of insulin's activity is contingent upon the healthy release of these gut hormones.
All right. Got it. So what you're saying is if we don't chew our food or masticate well enough, we're not going to stimulate the incretin. And the incretin is what stimulates that glucose so we can suck that blood sugar into the cell. Is that what I'm hearing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does a lot of that, but sorry to interrupt, but it also affects appetite and satiety as well. So if you don't chew your food, you're not going to send messages to your gut that the meal is coming. And then so the message will be almost as though, there's no fuel there, so that it's going to cause more craving issues and so forth. And to give you an idea, kind of how effective it really is. All the new diabetic medications now that are coming out in the pipeline are going after these gut hormones, these incretins. Names like Bayetta, Januvia, Escarbos was one of the first ones that came out in 2003. So this is where the industry's going. Like metformin has been around forever. Right. There's sulfonylureas. There's all these medications for diabetes. But the new trend is to go after these gut hormones. But the problem about the medications is they're challenging. They place extra stress on the pancreas. So it's better to kind of go after these hormones naturally because, you don't want to mess with the pancreas. I mean, people will tell you that's the worst, cancer you can get because it.
Got it.
Right.
Got it. So we eat this meal, we chew our food up really well. That's going to stimulate the incretin, which will help us have a healthy insulin response, which will help us suck all that nutrients into the cell, and it will also help signal that cascade of satiety, allowing us to feel relatively satiated and not overeat. Is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it goes even, everything that you said, Dr. Justin, but goes even further. The incretins are anti-inflammatory. They
Great.
have targets in the heart, in the brain, and so forth. So, whether or not you have a metabolic issue, you can also benefit from chewing your food if, say, you have an autoimmune inflammatory response,
Wow.
because these are very anti-inflammatory. Yeah, there's receptors for like GLP-1 all throughout the body, in the immune system, in the brain, and so forth. So, really critical, foundation, I mean, if you're eating gluten-free and you're doing paleo and exercising, you got to chew your food, bottom line.
Yeah, and I think I learned this from Paul Chek a long time ago. He said, drink your food and chew your water. So I always tell my patients, you should, for the most part, chew your food up to almost a oatmeal-like consistency. So it's almost liquid where you can slurp it right down and basically chew your water, meaning just let your water imprint on your saliva before you swallow it. So that's kind of a really, I think foundational principle for any nutritionist there for sure.
Yeah, it's huge.
And that's funny, Mike. Thank you. I wanted to touch upon one thing. I remember this was like 12 years ago. I was in doctorate school, or 10 years ago, and my roommate, we were on a plane together. We were flying out to a conference. I remember at the time I was eating a Subway sandwich. I know, terrible grains, processed meat. I get it. I know it was terrible. But I remember eating the Subway sandwich, taking a bite out of it. And then I'm looking over to my right, and my roommate is staring at me with his mouth dropped open. I go, what? He goes, you ate that, you chewed that food 3 bites and then swallowed. And I went, really? And then like from now on, I've been like, really trying to go like 30 to 35. What was the number you said, 35 bites?
42.
42. I think it's so important. I mean, I recommend just, for the most part, I think if you chew it up to that oatmeal-like consistency, you'll probably be right around there, so you don't have to be super anal. But I think that's super good advice, and for anyone that's, eating or trying to be mindful, kind of just have a good idea of what 42 bites feels like, and then make sure you're in that ballpark.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Just practice, when you have time. Or the other thing too is just eat with family or eat with your friends and try to eat with people. And I notice for me, when I'm eating by myself, that's when I really, I'm just trying to, it's like a pit stop, And so I think that's for most people, just first of all, be cognizant of it. Don't beat yourself up over it. Like you said, I mean, if you're starving and you wolf down a sandwich or some whatever it is, gluten-free cookies, just be mindful of it, and just being aware of that is the first step. And then just saying, okay, man, and then evaluate, why did I just wolf that down? Was I lonely? Was I really hungry? Am I mad? Was it a hard day at work? And just kind of seeing what's going on. Then that way, going forward, you can, improve and progress and so forth. And so it's, progress, not perfection, is kind of what I like to tell people.
Progress, not perfection. That's great. Really good. So on that note, because I got you on the show here, and you're just such a really good, person for hormones and all the biochem. So I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper. Is that okay, Mike?
For sure. Let's do it.
All right. And then if we kind of go a little too deep, I'll kind of pull you back a little bit, break it down for the listeners just to make sure we get the big picture.
Yeah.
So we eat this food, right? We stimulate some insulin. We have some adiponectin. What do we need to be doing? What kind of stimulation, like what kind of hormone stimulation do we need to be looking for to have fat loss? And what does that mean? Like what do we have to be doing? Is the chewing, certain types of foods, the timing, how long between meals, the type of exercise? What do we have to be doing to push our hormones in the right direction? Can you just talk about that? I know it's broad.
Yeah, no, that's broad. But let's just kind of go through like the day, starting out with the morning, and then we can kind of walk our way through that. So basically, you actually burn a lot of fat while you're sleeping. So that's something that people don't really realize, is that fat carries with it a big energetic punch. It's more calories per gram than say carbohydrates and protein. So anyway, the way that we stay asleep and our body kind of stays rested is by burning fat for fuel. So it's very important to go to bed at the same time every single night and make sure that you get get 8+ hours of sleep, particularly if you're training. That's really important. So folks that are, exercising, doing CrossFit, weightlifting, you got to get your sleep. And then when you wake up, you actually are still kind of riding on the coattails of that fat burning. So I suggest to a lot of people do some sort of cardio first thing in the morning if you can. So that would be getting out, doing some walking, doing some aerobics. That could be doing yoga, just something to get moving first thing in the morning, and then eat breakfast immediately afterwards. And it's also beneficial to have caffeine first thing in the morning as well, because caffeine actually helps to enhance the lipolysis, or the burning of fat.
Burning of fat. Now, if someone has issues with adrenal fatigue, would you recommend at least having a little bit of protein or a little bit of food just before, maybe a shake with collagen? Would you recommend that before? Or would you always recommend on an empty stomach?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. I'm kind of one of those people where I burn through stuff pretty quickly. So I tend to do what you just said, Dr. Justin, is I'll have just like a whey protein shake or a beef protein, first thing in the morning. But, if fat loss is really your goal, then if you can make it 25 minutes, like you get up, and you just have your cup of coffee or some green tea or something and just go for a brisk walk, then come have breakfast, that's going to be ideal. Huge. And so studies have shown that, empty stomach is best. But you hit on a good point. Protein is huge too. So a lot of people don't eat enough protein. And I think when it comes to fat loss, the studies have clearly showed that you need at least 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight up to 2.5 grams per kilo of body weight. So again, 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So you take your however many pounds you weigh, divide it by 2.2, multiply that by 1.6, up to 2.5. And this becomes more important as you age. So we tend to become more catabolic as we age. And so that's why you need more protein to maintain that lean muscle mass and also continue to burn fat.
So I'm going to break that down for the listeners. If I have my metrics right, 2.2 pounds per, or 2.2 kilograms per pound. So if you're doing 2.5 kilograms per pound, that's about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight or so for the high end. Is that correct, Mike?
Roughly, yep.
About 1 gram. So if you're 200 pounds, 200 grams of protein, 100 pounds, 100 grams protein.
Exactly.
Perfect. Okay. And one of the things I do in the morning, I'll get up and I'll do a Tabata. I have a rower in my home gym, and I'll get up and do a 20-second all-out burst with a 10-second relaxation period, 8 sets, and I'll do that first thing. Is that something you'd recommend for people to really boost fat burning?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, intervals are going to be much better. So everyone's at various levels of fitness and so forth. So if you're at the point where you can do intervals without hurting yourself, I would say absolutely do that, because you're actually going to burn a lot more fat for fuel. So that's a really great, anything that you can do. For folks that live in a hilly neighborhood, you can just go sprint up a hill or walk briskly up a hill. If you have a treadmill in your home, you can just turn on the elevation. There's so many different things. You can even do push-ups to failure, jumping. There's a million things that you can do. But the point is that we, do some movement on an empty stomach first thing in the morning, particularly if fat loss is your goal. Now, if you're lean and you like where you are, you actually should probably do exercise in the afternoon, because that's when our neuromuscular connections and energy and so forth, and actually anabolic potential is at its greatest. So it gets a little confusing, again, fat loss, first thing in the morning, empty stomach. Now, if you're already lean, just work out in the afternoon, because you're going to be able to push more weight, do more activity. Your body heat is going to be at its highest, and neurologically, you're going to be able to move your muscles better.
And that's more just a short duration type of interval type of exercise. We're not going like an hour or so. We're going like maybe a 10 to 20 or 30 minute bout of exercise in the morning.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Great. Yeah. What's one of the things I always see with some of my CrossFitters? They'll just get up, go to CrossFit, and it's like an hour, hour and a half. They come back and they're eating 2.5 hours after they wake up. I'm like, Oh my gosh, you're killing your metabolism.
I know. And then they wonder why they can't lose weight.
Yeah. And then they get super adrenal fatigue. And yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, I know. It's funny. I have some friends that are like that. They're like, I go to CrossFit first thing in the morning, then I go to work afterwards. And I'm like, well, when do you eat breakfast? Well, I mean, I have yogurt, like some raw yogurt in the car on the way to work and this and that. And it's like, well, how are your workouts? Well, I kind of feel fatigued afterwards. Like if those are things that you're feeling, like you should not, I mean, unless the workout is very, very intense and very long, you shouldn't be like totally trashed afterwards. And so that's something, first thing in the morning, your glycogen stores are going to be totally depleted. And glycogen is stored sugar inside your muscle tissue and so forth. And so that's why, the word breakfast is breaking the fast. So, you are pretty depleted first thing in the morning. So, if you're going to CrossFit and that can be high volume, high intensity, and for a long period of time, you're definitely going to want to eat beforehand. And, kind of what Dr. Justin and I are talking about, just the fat loss 20-minute thing, no food. But if you're doing a workout, you definitely want to eat food. And that's where little protein, little carbs come in. So you could do a smoothie, with berries and fruit and maybe a frozen banana, whey protein, pea protein, something along those lines. But really important because, if you work out extensively on an empty stomach and you have no fuel in your muscles, meaning no glycogen, your body's going to start breaking down muscle tissue. And that's exactly what you don't want to have happen because, again, where you burn fat is inside your muscle and you want to preserve muscle. And the way you do that is by eating real food.
That's great. And you like whey protein and collagen combined. Is that a good amino acid source?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really important. And then also, since I didn't mention it, in the post-workout window, so some people are not really hungry after they work out. So let's kind of say that you're going to go, do CrossFit or powerlifting or whatever, go to the weight room, in the afternoon, and you have lunch at maybe, 1 o'clock and so forth. You definitely want to eat immediately after you work out in terms of having a protein shake. And so studies have shown that around, 3 grams of leucine, which is one of the branched chain amino acids, is very important for turning on this intracellular signaling molecule called mTOR. And mTOR is needed to activate all these transcription factors and growth factors and to help repair the muscle, so that it can be stronger for the next workout. And so this becomes even more important as we age because we get more catabolic, as I mentioned earlier, meaning our muscle tissue repair is not as good and so forth. And so we can preserve a lot of our lean muscle mass just by having a protein shake after we work out. And moreover, you're going to burn more fat for hours and hours and hours after you work out if you have a protein shake because while the body's kind of repairing the muscle tissue that you damaged during your workout, it spares protein and carbohydrates and it kicks on fat burning. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. So when you go to the weight room and you really work out hard and so forth, you're actually burning mostly carbs for fuel, with the exception of the morning, which we can dive into a little bit. But then afterwards, you're repairing those glycogen stores and those protein stores. So you create this calorie deficit, and then the body will start burning fat for fuel. So really important, having a protein shake, even if you're not hungry immediately after you work out.
Very cool. And then this whole mTOR, I love it. It's such a cool little word. Mammalian target of rapamycin. And can you break down what mTOR is? And is our goal to inhibit it or to activate it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, just like anything else in the body, there's kind of a U-shaped curve. And so mTOR is activated, in chronic disease states as well. So people get kind of confused, like, well, wait, I don't think you want mTOR activated. And you do in the short term. So you don't want chronic activation of mTOR, just like you wouldn't want chronic activation of, say, T regulatory cells, which are also anti-inflammatory. Even like our telomeres, the protective caps on our chromosomes, those are upregulated in cancer. So anyway, we want this pulsatile effect of mTOR to be increased. And the way that we get that is by eating periodic protein, so breakfast, lunch, dinner. And then after we work out, we definitely want mTOR to be activated because that's going to help make us more insulin sensitive. It's going to help repair muscle tissue, turn on all these good things that are going to benefit the mitochondria and so forth.
Right. That totally makes sense. This is really deep stuff. I love it. So mTOR, we're trying to upregulate that, and taking that extra bit of protein and amino acids right after we exercise will really help, and that'll help us put on some muscles and also help us become less or more insulin sensitive, which is also a good thing as well.
That too, but muscle's coming back. Muscle releases these things called myokines, which I'm sure your listeners have heard of cytokines like TNF-alpha and interleukin-6. Well, muscle actually releases its own cytokines, which are very anti-inflammatory. The amount of lean muscle mass you have means that you're going to be less inflamed.
Right.
Muscle mass independently correlates with longevity and the ability to live independently outside of a nursing home. So, when you hear words like anti-aging and people taking a straggler's route to turn on their telomeres and so forth. Like, let's just focus at the base of the core of this. And, muscle is anti-aging. So if you want to slow down your aging process and so forth, you want more muscle. And I'm not suggesting that we turn into bodybuilders, but just have a nice lean physique. So that's important. And also as you mentioned, Dr. Justin, insulin sensitivity, but also your resting metabolic rate. So meaning burning fat, burning calories for fuel while you're sitting around doing nothing. The more muscle mass you have, the higher your resting metabolic rate is.
Very, very good. Now, I also have a lot of patients that come to me and they're like, but I'm just not hungry in the morning. I just don't want breakfast. With those people, what's going on? Can you break down what's happening in the biochemistry and physiology?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. I hear that a lot. And when I was doing a lot of nutrition work in a medical setting, that was like the biggest thing I heard. And what I find is you get stuck in this vicious cycle. Like, people aren't really hungry for breakfast. They kind of have like a muffin and a Diet Coke for lunch. And then they get ravenously hungry for dinner and have like a big dinner. And then they're up late on the computer and so forth. So their circadian rhythms totally shot. And so what I recommend for people, if you're not hungry for breakfast, here's what you do. You skip dinner, okay? And for some people that they're like, what do you mean skip dinner? That's when my biggest meal. That's when I eat with my family. It's like, no, just eat dinner. Well, if you can eat dinner at like 5 o'clock, just eat really early or skip it entirely. And I'm telling you, you will be hungry for breakfast the next day. And if you're not, and I don't know what's going on with your gut, or if you're not moving enough during the day or something, but get your circadian rhythm back on board. Start out by just skipping dinner one night and getting enough sleep. Turn off the iPads, the iPhones, the Kindles, and all the lights at night, and try to go to bed before 10, and get your biological rhythms back on board, and your gut will be hungry. You'll get those hunger pings and so forth once you get your biological rhythms on board. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing is you get in this pattern of just eating large meals at night, and then I'm very active. I weigh 200 plus pounds. If I eat a big dinner late, I'm not hungry either in the morning. So I think it's important just to kind of get your rhythms back on board.
I think so too. And I just see a lot of patients, they're in this sympathetic type of overload where essentially our autonomic nervous system, we have our sympathetic, which is like our fight or flight, and we have this parasympathetic, which is where we're resting, we're digesting, we're repairing, and so many people are stuck in this sympathetic state, and a lot of the blood is flowing more to the extremities away from the core, so they wake up, they're not hungry because they're locked in this sympathetic state. And one thing I do with a lot of my patients, I say, hey, let's just negotiate a little bit of a protein shake, maybe a scoop or something of maybe collagen, or hey, give me a scoop of coconut oil or a scoop of grass-fed meat. And what I find happens is after a couple of days, they get a little bit more hungrier, and then we'll also throw in some HCl and enzymes, and it's like their furnace kind of starts to catch and their metabolism starts turning on.
Mm-hmm. Great point. And then also, like we kind of introduced this call, Dr. Justin, is doing a little bit of activity in the morning. So for folks, maybe they're new to exercise or something like that, just getting out and walking and getting natural sunlight too. That will also help to what we call entrain or reset their biological clock. So one of the biggest stimulators of our circadian clock system is light. And that can work either for us or against us, and meaning against us if we're having a lot of light at night, the computers are on, the phones are on, the TV's on, and so forth, then you're telling your body that it's daytime. And so as such, it's going to produce daytime molecules, which are incongruent with sleep, like cortisol, noradrenaline, and all these things. And then people wonder why they can't sleep or why their mind's racing and when they're lying in bed. So that's why it's really important to turn out the lights when you should have them turned off, and to get natural daylight first thing in the morning if you can. And that's why this activity, the fat loss is really congruent with resetting your circadian clock, because, if you get up and exercise outside and go for a walk, get some fresh air, you're turning on that PNS system like you just mentioned, and then you're also getting your circadian clock system back on track, and that's going to be great for appetite, fat burning, prevent cancer, heart disease, and so forth.
That's great. And is there any research on maybe doing some grounding or earthing, maybe while you're outside, maybe you're barefoot on the back lawn, sipping some coffee while the sun's coming up, so you're activating this whole circadian rhythm? Is there any other research or data on the other elements I mentioned?
Gosh, I wish there was, and there could be.
Yeah.
I definitely believe in it, in grounding and EMFs and so forth. But I don't know that grounding has been looked at from a scientific standpoint. That said, I would definitely do that. Yeah, sometimes I'll finish off. We live near a hiking hill, Bastyr University in Seattle, and so sometimes I'll finish off the hike without shoes, and people kind of look at me like, "Dude, what's this hippie guy doing?" It's like, no, I'm just grounding, And so I think it's really important for people that if you can do that wherever you live. I know in the inner city that might be hard, but it's amazing. It's subtle, the effects it has on your body, but it's definitely valid. And so along those lines, we generally unplug a lot of the electronic devices and turn off our Wi-Fi at night. And that's just a simple strategy to...
Same thing.
Yeah.
And I guess what's happening with the grounding is that we're dispelling a lot of the positive ions that's been accumulated throughout the day. Is that the mechanism?
Yeah, I think so. I believe so.
Okay. All right. Well, we got a lot more brain candy to come here. So we talked about adiponectin. We talk about insulin resistance, mTOR. All right. So what's our ideal time frame in between meals? We don't want to go too far, but at the same time, we don't want to be grazing because then we'll just be spitting out insulin and only burning the food that we're eating and not our fat. So what's that time frame between meals you like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it varies for everyone. And this is where we kind of need to become intuitive and just trust our body and realize like, okay, you're hungry or you're not hungry. I mean, there are some days when I'm super active and like I can barely go 2 hours without, something. So I just listen to my body. And so we all kind of know where that's at. And so I think it depends on, your stress level, your activity level, and kind of what your health goals are. If I was, overweight and trying to lose weight, I would probably extend it out a little bit, in between meals. But, the studies, research actually does show that snacking is beneficial so long as folks are snacking on healthy things. So this would be maybe a piece of fruit, nuts, seeds, a protein shake, something light. There's something to be said about bowel rest, giving your gut a little bit of a break, before you just constantly throwing in foods into the chute every 2 hours. So everyone's really different. And I think, you just, again, listen to your body and kind of what your goals are. But healthy snacks, I would think, would just be rich in fat, so soaked raw nuts, for example, a protein shake, things of that sort, if and only if, you're really feeling hungry, your activity level is high and so forth. But don't just snack because you heard it was good, and you're not really hungry and you're kind of being mindless, because some people get stuck in that rut. They're like, well, I was heard or told you should eat every 2 hours, and then they're eating and they're not even really hungry. They're just kind of eating because they heard on some TV show where a friend of a friend said they should. So you just want to kind of get into your own body and listen and kind of respond appropriately.
Got it. Can you just give us a general time frame? Let's say the average person, they're relatively healthy. Is 4 or 5 hours a pretty good time frame between meals, would you say, on average?
Yeah, I would say at least 2.5 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
So if we talk about like transit time, the gut, depending upon the size of the meal and how much fat you have, the gut can kind of process things in about 90 minutes. If it's just a protein shake, we're talking like, 60 or even 40 minutes. So I would say for most folks, between 3 and 5 hours. And you wouldn't really want to go longer than 5-6 hours unless you're trying to do some sort of modified fast or a cleanse or something along those lines. But I think, and we can kind of talk about this too, this calorie restriction, because there is some good research on restricting calories. Some folks, like Mark Houston, has recommended skipping dinner 3 nights a week, and that will kind of mimic the 25% reduction in calorie intake that is linked with longevity. So that's another thing too for people. If you, instead of doing this intermittent fasting thing, just skip dinner like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, 3 days a week. But back to your question, I think 3 to 5 hours between meals would be beneficial. And again, listen to your body. I mean, if you're crashing or you can't think straight, you don't want to be firing your adrenal glands or having these blood sugar crashes either. That's not good.
All right, got it. So let's compare and contrast what Dr. Mark Houston's talking about and basic intermittent fasting. So intermittent fasting, for the most part, is we're going to finish our dinner maybe around 5, 6 o'clock or so the night before. We're going to not eat sleep that whole night, get up, not eat again that morning, and then maybe eat again around 2, 3 o'clock. So then we're having about a 20-hour window or so of fasting. Is that the general gist there?
Yeah, well, so his thing is just go 12 hours, so basically, and this is research, and I haven't looked at the actual studies on this particular research. I'm just going off kind of a word of mouth thing here. But based upon some studies that were conducted in Italy, I believe, it was a 12-hour fast. So individuals were eating dinner at 6 p.m. and then not eating again until 6 or 7 a.m. the next day. And I think that's the best way to go. I know there's, and you might be a proponent of this intermittent fasting deal where folks are not eating breakfast, but I'm not really a fan of that. I personally I've experimented that with myself and with other people, and I think you get kind of weak, your blood sugar crashes. So I think it's better to skip dinner instead and then just have a nice healthy breakfast. But I know there's a lot of people right now promoting this intermittent fasting thing, and having protein and having fat, like collagen, like you mentioned earlier. But I think a better approach, and based upon these new research studies, is to really skip, dinner periodically and then continue to eat breakfast and lunch.
Yeah, I see a lot of patients that come in that are doing intermittent fasting, and they're really screwed up because, I mean, a lot of the fasting mechanism runs through gluconeogenesis, which is the process of converting protein to glucose, but that mechanism involves cortisol. So if we have cortisol dysregulation where we can't pump out the cortisol at high enough levels in the AM, we're not going to be able to produce the energy we need. So what do you think? I mean, you've already alluded to it already, but I find intermittent fasting causing, a lot of damage and creating weakness in some people, especially ones that already aren't healthy to begin with. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, okay, good. We're on the same page. I wasn't sure kind of where you stood on that. Yeah, I definitely think it's not a good idea. I think there's value in giving bowel rest. There's value in calorie restriction, but don't skip breakfast, don't skip lunch, skip dinner. That's the biggest thing. And so, like you mentioned, I mean, you're activating the adrenal glands because your blood sugar is going into this really low state, and norepinephrine and cortisol are trying to raise blood sugar, and then you get stressed out, and then these folks tend to, kind of overconsume food in the evening. And I think some of this research kind of the thinking process of, validating why this is healthy is, basically, evidently, I guess this is what, indigenous people and primal people did. And I don't know if we really have that data to show that primal people didn't eat lunch or didn't eat breakfast, And so I just kind of come back to basic biology. And as we kind of talked about the circadian clock system and how our body has these little cells inside every organ and tissue, our GI tract is most active, is most receptive to receiving food in the morning and middle part of the day. So you can't argue that. You can't argue genetic analysis and, microarray analysis. And so also we can absorb the most carbohydrates during the middle part of the day. The pancreas is most receptive to releasing insulin and so forth. So I think we should eat within, our circadian rhythm. And that shows that our GI tract is really active between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. So I think we should have majority of our calories during that time. And, if you're going to give your bowel some rest and do this calorie restriction, then just skip dinner.
That makes sense. And what's your take on a bulletproof intermittent fasting where you're maybe having some high quality coffee with MCT and grass-fed butter? What's your take on that where you're sparing the protein but high fat?
I kind of go back. I'm a little bit old school when it comes to this, and kind of look at, so what sort of like modern day people get really lean and preserve muscle mass, and that would be like bodybuilders and fitness models and so forth. And so what do? They do a high fat, high protein diet, and a lot of vegetables. And so, I think I don't know what sort of protein sparing effect occurs when you do a lot of fat. I haven't done that research. When you do, like, for example, bulletproof coffee and no protein, I would say, my just, kind of understanding of this would be that you can do this bulletproof coffee high fat, but also have protein, or at least at the bare minimum, supplement with branched chain amino acids and glutamine. So getting those amino acids in there, because, if you get low in those aminos, that's when you start breaking down muscle tissue. And, as we talked about earlier, how anti-inflammatory and how beneficial muscle is, you don't want to break that down. So that would be my perspective.
But isn't some of the mechanism that's happening here with intermittent fasting, isn't that cellular autophagy where we're trying to recycle some of the muscle that's already there? So we're trying to recycle that protein by fasting on protein. So instead of taking in protein, we're trying to then recycle some of the protein that's already there. Is that what the goal is here with intermittent fasting, where the benefits lie?
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I haven't looked at that research, and if that's kind of what folks are saying, like Dave Asprey and stuff, then I would believe it. But I just know that basically, we go back to like mTOR and we go back to muscle protein synthesis and so forth. What research does show is that when bodybuilders are trying to lose weight, and cut for a competition, they invariably burn muscle mass, and the way that they offset that loss of muscle mass is by cranking up the protein. So I don't really know the effects of protein's turnover and autophagy. I mean, obviously cells are turning over and recycling and so forth, but I don't really know how much would grow back, if you don't have the amino acids. So that's my perspective, my vantage point. I could be totally wrong. Would say you don't want to replace protein with just super high fat. If you want to do the high fat and cut out the carbs and turn on this autophagy, that's cool. But my perspective would be supplement with protein or at least branched chain amino acids, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I caught my wife this week. She went out 3 days just with bulletproof coffee and MCT. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like, here, have some whey protein and some collagen before you knock down the coffee, or have it right after the coffee, so you at least get the extra aminos in so you don't go catabolic. So we're definitely on the same page there, Mike.
Yeah, and then I'll just share a personal story too. So my wife got into all these podcasts, and so a couple of years ago, and Dave Asprey's Bulletproof, and started doing that, and she lost a lot of muscle, lost a lot of strength. And I told her, I'm like, Dana, you need to at least have some protein. So she was doing this intermittent fasting thing, Bulletproof coffee, and we buy Bulletproof coffee. I love it, but we also supplement with the protein. And she realized, we look at pictures of her like 2 years ago, and she was really like kind of gaunt, it's real skinny, and lost a lot of the strength that she had. And a lot of that occurred during that time when she was doing this protocol. So that's kind of where I personally haven't done it. I don't know but I know that if I don't eat protein, I feel weak. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people out there doing it. And if you're going to do it, I choose a weekend day, choose a day where you don't have so much cortisol or adrenaline stimulation from work or whatever. At least then there's not going to be as much stress on your body mentally and physically.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Yeah. So let's talk about branched chain amino acids. You just brought those up. Can you touch upon what branched chain amino acids are and how can they be used to enhance muscle building and fat loss?
Oh, yeah. Well, so there's basically 3 types of branched chain amino acids that fall into the category. So you have leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And leucine turns on this mTOR that we talked about earlier. And so it's great for improving blood sugar regulation, improving muscle protein synthesis, and resting metabolic rate, and so forth. So there's some really good research, showing that leucine, 3 grams several times a day, improves workout performance, recovery, resting metabolic rate, and so forth. And so most high quality protein. And so I like to, tell people, it's like, okay, look, if you want to, whatever protein you're kind of fixated on, just look at the amino acid composition of that protein. And that's going to, kind of let you know how good it is for you. And so studies have actually shown that whey protein that's low in leucine doesn't have the same effect. That's why vegan proteins tend to be not so beneficial, except for pea protein. Pea protein is actually really rich in leucine. And research have a team, this was, I think, in early February, compared the effects of muscle protein synthesis, which we want, with whey protein and pea protein, and found that pea protein is actually as beneficial for post-workout recovery and resting metabolic rate as whey protein, because it's rich in this branched chain amino acid leucine.
Very good. And can you talk about the insulinogenic effects of BCAAs? I mean, a lot of people are like, well, it's going to stimulate insulin. You got to be careful, insulin resistance. What's your take on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, insulin is anabolic, so insulin puts stuff in cells, right? I mean, that's why it's, it lowers blood sugar. Why?
Hopefully
because
muscle though, right? Not fat.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so part of its process and part of the whole mTOR signaling does involve insulin, but we're not going to make folks insulin resistant from taking BCAAs. So it's just a mild kind of anabolic effect localized to muscle tissue, but it actually improves insulin signaling. So in diabetics, for example, or insulin resistant folks, taking BCAAs will actually improve insulin signaling. So I wouldn't worry about it for the reasons that it does, kind of interfere with or augment or utilize those pathways. It's not going to make you insulin resistant.
Yeah, so essentially insulin's there to also shuttle to sugar into fat cells to make more fat, but it also, again, if we're exercising, we're automatically going to be utilizing sugar for fuel, but that insulin, that punctuated insulin spike will help shuttle those aminos into our muscle to help hypertrophy and grow that muscle.
Exactly. Well said.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. All right. So we talked a little bit about insulin. We talked a little bit about some of these appetite suppressing hormones. What's next on the list for our listeners? Where should we go next?
Yeah, I would say leptin. So leptin, a lot of people kind of have pigeonholed leptin into just this sort of appetite signaling hormone, and that it is. So basically leptin is released from fat tissue, and it tells your hypothalamus how much fuel you have on board. A high leptin would tell your brain that you don't need to eat. A low leptin would signal you to eat. And so we kind of have talked about why it's important to eat breakfast and then eat lunch and eat all your calories throughout the day, because then you're going to tell your brain, your fat cells are going to release a lot of leptin. They're going to tell your brain that you don't need to eat a big dinner. But what we have happen is a lot of people skip breakfast, they eat this weak lunch, and then they're starving for dinner, then they're not hungry for breakfast. You get that vicious cycle. So that's kind of the circadian oscillation of leptin. Really low in the morning, it starts to rise throughout the day. And the way that we do that, maintain that natural rhythm, is getting enough sleep and eating a lot of calories during the day and not eating too much food for dinner. But that's kind of the metabolic aspect of leptin. Leptin also has this really unique immune role, and it actually is pro-inflammatory. So we see a high correlation with autoimmune disease and belly fat. We see, individuals with rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis and lupus and Hashimoto's and so forth have elevated levels of leptin as well. And leptin suppresses this really anti-inflammatory signaling molecule in our immune system called the T regulatory cell. So I kind of liken the T regulatory cell kind of like cops and robbers. You have various T helper cells, which I'm sure you've talked about, like Th1 and Th2. Yep. And then you also have this cop, this policeman, the T reg cell, that will suppress inflammatory T helper cells. The problem is in the context of high leptin, our T reg cells are not functional. So leptin, by nature, hyperleptinemia, elevated levels of leptin, is linked with more inflammation because these T reg cells are basically not around.
That makes sense. Doesn't vitamin D also have an effect on these T reg cells as well?
In a good way.
Yeah.
It will turn, like many things, for example, omega-3 fats, exercising, meditation, heart math. You mentioned earlier the parasympathetic versus sympathetic state. Folks that are in a parasympathetic state, they're going to naturally have higher levels of these T regulatory cells because basically, the spleen, it's kind of complex, but when you're in that parasympathetic state, your spleen releases this molecule called choline, and that will enable the interleukin-10 cytokine to be turned on. And that interleukin-10 cytokine is what amplifies T reg cells. So Lactobacillus plantarum, curcumin, vitamin D, fish oil, all turn on interleukin-10, which will eventually then turn on these T reg cells. But leptin blocks that. So if you have belly fat, you have high leptin, you're going to be more inflamed. It's just how it works.
So leptin essentially, or a lot of what we're doing here, reducing the inflammation, is going to turn off that interleukin-10. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so leptin doesn't necessarily have a direct effect on interleukin-10, but it suppresses the production of these beneficial T reg cells, and the factor that interleukin-10 turns on the T reg cells. So we kind of have this kind of antagonistic relationship going on. So the more fat you have, the more leptin you have. The more leptin you have, the less T regulatory cells you're going to have. So the reason why you want to lose weight is not only because it may not look that good, for example, but you're creating an inflammatory milieu in your body. So heart disease, neurologic disorders, Alzheimer's, memory loss, autoimmunity, and so forth. So that's kind of the whole point, why I wrote the book Belly Fat Effect is, you got to lose this weight to prevent chronic disease because your fat cells are releasing all this leptin and they're driving inflammation. Pretty much every disease you can think of is linked with inflammation.
Okay, so just want to make sure I heard you. So lower levels of leptin, right? Being more leptin sensitive will help suppress or decrease interleukin-10. Is that correct?
It will increase it.
So
yeah, high leptin means low T reg cells, which is bad.
Got it.
Low leptin means there's high levels of T reg cells, which is good. So basically leptin puts the brakes on the production of your Treg cells, which we don't want. So any autoimmune mess that we have in our thyroid, which we all have, we're all probably on the verge of autoimmunity or not. It just kind of depends on our environment, right? So we're all chronically, have some low-grade inflammation, and our body's managing it, but having high leptin levels are going to prevent these policemen from breaking up these little fights that are going on inside our joint tissue and our thyroid gland and so forth. And we don't want that. So then we're going to have more inflammation. Maybe antibodies will start being produced and so forth.
So what can we do to start making our cells more sensitive to leptin or decrease leptin production? What can we do?
Basically everything we've been talking about. So the more muscle tissue you have, there's actually leptin receptors on muscle tissue. So that what's really cool is the more muscle you have, the more leptin sensitive you're going to be, because you actually have more receptors there. So you can like soak more of it up. But just, like we said earlier, Dr. Justin, eating breakfast, getting back to getting a good night's sleep. When you interfere with your sleep production, your leptin levels get off. Just exercise, vitamin D, fish oil, all these different things. I mean, basically everything we've been talking about will also beneficially improve leptin.
Okay, got it. And isn't there an insulin-leptin connection as well? Aren't insulin and leptin tied together?
Yeah, there is. So they are. Yes. So another aspect I forgot to mention about leptin is gut health is really important. So I think you've talked about in some of your videos, like H. pylori is an endotoxin containing bacteria. So the endotoxin is like a bacterial appendage, very pro-inflammatory, that actually causes leptin and insulin resistance. It's a complex mechanism, but so gut health is a huge part of this too. It's really important.
Okay, got it. And would you recommend patients or people testing their leptin, like via blood?
You can, but that's what all the research studies are based on. But I will just tell you, if you have a body fat percentage above 20 in men and above 25 in women, your leptin levels are going to be high. You don't even need to waste your money on doing testing and so forth. I mean, this is based on Eric Braverman, a medical doctor in New York, did basically a study in his office, I think, of 1,200 patients over the course of 10 years. And he tracked body fat percentage and tracked leptin, tracked insulin and so forth. And body fat percentage and leptin correlate 1-to-1. So sure, if you want to prove it to yourself that you do or don't have high leptin levels, sure, test it. But when you retest, you want to make sure that you test it at the same time, because leptin, just like cortisol, oscillates on a 24-hour basis. And so you want to test it first thing in the morning.
Got it. So essentially, all the things we can do to help become more insulin sensitive will also help us become more leptin sensitive.
Exactly.
That's great. So, all right. So the big take home is sleep, the right kinds of exercise, eating in the morning, high quality protein, and anti-inflammatory foods, avoiding the refined grains and gluten and things like that. Is there anything else you want to add into the mix here?
I would add in supplementing with protein. And like we kind of talked about, research now is showing that pea protein is pretty decent. And I know some paleo folks or FODMAP folks are like, no, don't, pea protein's a grain and so forth, or legume. And it does, it is derived from legumes and so forth, but it's really low in lectins. And so we don't want those anti-nutrients. So for people that have a dairy sensitivity, you can supplement with pea protein. Chewing your food, and then obviously the environmental toxin thing. I mean, we could talk about that. I'm sure you've talked about that many times. But there are toxins. Basically, I'm working on a blog post on this. I was reading some research. I didn't realize this, but you've kind of heard it that, fat cells congregate toxins, and they really do. So it's important that we understand that, we want to minimize exposure to parabens and phthalates and plastics and preservatives and pesticides and all these compounds, because they're affecting adipogenesis, or the formation of new fat cells. They're affecting our, metabolic systems in a negative way. So live a cleaner, simpler life. If you're going to go out and have coffee, take the lid off so you're not just melting this plastic into your coffee and so forth. But those would be kind of some of the basics that you summarized.
Are you familiar with Jack Kruse's take on leptin?
I've heard his name, but not necessarily, no.
Okay. All right, got it. I just didn't know if you had some more information on his aspect of it. His is a little bit unique, but it's okay. No problem. I just didn't know if you had any more info on that.
Well, maybe why don't you tell me what it is? I'm curious now.
Well, I mean, he talks a lot about light and different UV and then different glasses and a whole bunch of other things. I'm diving into it right now,
Hmm.
and I'm probably gonna have him on the podcast here soon to break it down. So I'll keep you posted, and I'll shoot you over that as soon as I get it done.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, along those lines, so the circadian clock system is huge for regulating leptin processing. And so a lot of people that have the lights on, at night and computer and all that sort of stuff, their
Yeah.
leptin levels will be altered. So I think, just like we talked about earlier, like for folks that are not hungry when they wake up and so on, and you had some nice strategies there, but getting natural light for, affecting the hormone hunger pathways are great, but it will also reset your leptin release. And so a lot of people have this inverse rhythm where, leptin it's real low at night and then high in the day. And so the message to the brain is that you're hungry at night and not hungry during the day. So, maybe there's some value there with the different glasses, but I think just a, timeless strategy, get natural sunlight, no sunglasses during the day, for a period of time so you can activate your circadian clock.
Yeah, very good. Excellent. I like what you said about fat. And a lot of these toxins are fat soluble, and eating high quality fat will trigger our gallbladder to release bile, which is, again, conjugating and helping to remove potentially these fat-soluble toxins. So it's like every time you eat some good quality fat, it's like changing the sludgy oil in your car and helping your gallbladder release a lot of these, potentially toxic bile that will help, get excreted in your stool.
For sure. And then moreover, I mean, bile is really metabolically active. There's bile receptors all throughout our body and our brain and so forth. And also bile helps us soak up some of these bad bacterial particulate like endotoxin that make us leptin and insulin resistant. So really bile is so important. I'm so glad you mentioned that because we tend to forget about it. Like, focus on hydrochloric acid and enzymes, and then bile is kind of like, oh yeah, that stuff further down the gut, but it's really important. And again, the way that bile is released is by chewing your food and getting that acidic chyme in the upper portion of the small intestine. So you activate all those downstream hormones. So it's so important to, again, like we talked about, just chew your food.
Yeah, very cool. And can you talk about methylation? I know you have a video on Facebook that really goes into methylation, homocysteine, and the whole MTHFR thing with Ben Lynch and a lot of people. What folate do we use? MTHFR SNPs. Can you break that topic down?
Sure. Yeah. I'll just preface that, I'm not a methylation expert, but Ben and I are pretty close friends. He lives down the street from me, and we actually go out and hike together all the time and stuff like that. But, basically, the thing about methylation that, that I would love your listeners to kind of understand is the link between homocysteine and SAMe, or S-adenosylhomocysteine. So if we can kind of envision a circle, and at the top of the circle would be methionine, and then kind of in the middle we'd have S-adenosylhomocysteine, which is the body's universal methyl donor. And as Dr. Ben will tell you, some of the metabolites inside our cells, or metabolic functions, ATP is one of the number one in terms of activity. The most, cells are making ATP all day long. The number two metabolic activity is SAMe. So cells are constantly, adding and subtracting methyl groups, and that's what turns on our DNA and so forth. But homocysteine would be kind of at the bottom of the cycle. And when homocysteine is high, it's in equilibrium with a compound called S-adenosylhomocysteine, which blocks SAMe. And so basically, we know homocysteine is linked with heart disease and so forth. But when it's high, that means that your methylation is blocked. So your ability to make creatine, make phospholipids, hormones, neurotransmitters, activate DNA, turn off DNA, and so forth is all altered when your homocysteine is stuck. And even more so of a problem is that cysteine, part of homocysteine, goes on to make glutathione below the cycle, below that circle we kind of envision. So what that also means is if your homocysteine is high, that you're not making glutathione, which is the body's primary antioxidant. So it's a really big deal.
So if we have one of these pathways off here, let's say we have high homocysteine, what can we do? It's like, what does that mean to the average person, and what can they do?
Yeah, great point. So first of all, I mean, if you don't have enough protein in your diet, like we talked about earlier, a lot of amino acids, one of the main amino acids in meat is methionine. So we can drive this pathway down. It's kind of I know you know this Le Chatelier's principle back in like chemistry and stuff. So if you have this equation, like on one side we have high homocysteine, well, the way that we equalize this equation is by giving components of the other side of the equation, which would be methionine, which would be 5-MTHF, a form of activated folate, or methyl B12. And so that's kind of a way that we can do this. But also we can pull on the cycle by giving glutathione, by giving NAC, and by kind of sucking homocysteine through. So this kind of, an oversimplified, there's various SNPs and, caveats to this rule. But for the average person, who may not be getting enough vegetables, who's been eating a standard American diet for quite some time, could really benefit from some activated B12 and activated 5-MTHF.
Interesting. So we have this whole cycle where B6, B12, folate, they kind of all work together. But at the same time, I think a lot of people ignore the protein part of it. And protein is so important at pushing that pathway along, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where the methionine comes in. Proteins are very important, but it can also get stuck too. I mean, as Dr. Ben will tell you and other folks that are really into this research, which I'm just kind of giving you a cursory overview, more than 50% of the population has some sort of SNP in the folate metabolic pathway. And so you can create various metabolites, for example. So if you consume folic acid, that can create end products that inhibit other receptors and so on. So it gets really kind of complicated. So the bottom line is look at your multivitamin, make sure that it does not contain folic acid, that that it has either calcium folinate or 5-MTHF. And that's the active form. And also like your multivitamin or, your protein, whatever it is. And if it has cyanocobalamin, throw it out, get a new one. You want methylcobalamin.
Got it. That's great. Really, really good. And also the part about protein I think is really good, the L-methionine. So once you have the B6, the B12, the L-MTHF there, then if we have some good protein, especially the L-methionine, that's going to help run that cycle, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point. I mean, it's at the top of the cycle there too. So, and then also digestion too. So if say you're supplementing with these things and you might still be anxious or have sleep issues or whatever, you also want to make sure your digestion is important, because if we're not breaking down proteins, we're not absorbing these amino acids, and then kind of the third link there that I would like people to understand is this is all linked to detoxification, so we have the methylation cycle, and then we have homocysteine, and again, below that is glutathione. So really important that we're minimizing exposure to toxins and endocrine disrupting chemicals and all these pollutants in our food and so forth, because those can interfere with methylation and the glutathione aspect of it.
Yeah, very good. And also, I see a lot of people taking glutathione, which is a great detoxifier, but again, glutathione is behind. It's at the bottom of that whole entire cycle. So it's not going to be a replacement for either the SAMe or the L-methionine or those amino acids above the chain. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, so I think anyone that's taking glutathione, they should also be adding in the 5-MTHF and B12 and kind of looking at it from that side, because methylation and detox, they go hand in hand. They're kind of this different sides of the same coin. So glutathione is important. I mean, there's no question about that, and I think there's value in supplementing with it. But you want to support both sides of that equation. And also, glutathione is very expensive. Maybe folks would get the same benefit from just supporting kind of the upstream metabolites and not having to pay whatever it is, $70 a month for some of these liposomal compounds or whatever. I mean, activated B12 and folate you can get away with that with $18 a month retail. So different ways to kind of improve your cellular biochemistry without having to spend extra money.
Yeah, and one of the things I see, because I do a lot of organic acid testing on my patients, and we'll see these organic acids that are indicative of neurotransmitter imbalance, like 5-hydroxyindolyl acetate, homovanillate, vanilmandrolate. These are just organic acids that mean our serotonin or dopamine's off in the brain. One of the things we always have to do is we have to give the B6, folate, B12, but we also have to make sure those sulfur amino acids are there, because they're also important for dopamine metabolism. So sulfur is so important, not even just for detoxification, but also for healthy brain chemistry.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, that's a really great point.
Yeah. And you inspired me to do a video on this because I saw your video. I'm like, oh, this is, a really important topic that I think people need more elaboration on. So that's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other compound too, you probably would see off would be that 8-HTG, the marker of DNA damage.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. That's the 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine.
Right.
Yeah, I love that one. That's such a fun one to say.
Right.
And there was a conference here just in New York the other day, and one of the presenters, he was mentioning that you want that marker 4 or below. You want it below 4 ideally. So if you run an organic acid test, make sure that marker is below 4.
Interesting.
Good starting point. Yeah. Well, Mike, is there anything else you want to touch upon today? Or, we went over a lot of stuff, so our listeners are probably like at capacity. So rewind it, listen to it again. Anything else you want to touch upon here?
I think that's pretty much it, Dr. Justin. Yeah, we covered a whole lot there. And if anyone wants to, again, learn more information about, kind of the gut hormones and leptin and that circadian clock system, there's some free videos over at bellyfateffect.com.
Great. And where can our listeners find more about you outside of that site?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. My primary blog is highintensityhealth.com. And so I have a podcast like yourself and interview experts and do blog posts that are real pertinent with, how-tos, for example, how to avoid toxins or, different ways that you can increase your gut hormones, nutritionally and so forth. So
that's excellent.
Highintensityhealth.com would be the website.
Podcast. Great. And you also have a YouTube channel too?
Yeah. So that's just High Intensity Health in YouTube. Or if you type in Mike Mutzel, you'll pull that up as well.
Great. Awesome, Mike. Thanks so much. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks for having me on. This was great.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to beyondwellnessradio.com/question. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.